everyone. This is Cameron Smith from TechLogix here today to go through another one of our short little sales team training webinars. Today we're going to talk about how we can take twisted pair installations, twisted pair technology, and move that over to fiber optic cable. And frankly, we have to do that. In fact, today we're going to spend a lot of time talking about why fiber is necessary, kind of how twisted pair cable has evolved through different standards, but it's really reached the end of its functional life, especially when we're talking about a lot of these modern streaming networks. I mean, look at today, we're all remote, we're all streaming video. It takes a lot of bandwidth. And then when we look at video distribution, 4K, 8K, we start to talk about bigger standards, faster standards. We really got to start to think about optical cables. And you know that we do a lot of these trainings. This is a pretty hot topic right now. We get a lot of attention from different integrators who are out there pulling cable. Well, hopefully today you're going to learn a little bit. This will give you more fodder to have those conversations and help continue to make folks a little bit more educated in the field, especially when it comes to technology. Let's start the conversation today talking about low voltage cabling. And specifically, let's look at standard twisted pair cable. I mean, this is what we've pulled for years, right? We've worked with unshielded twisted pair cables to move video, move data signals, even control signals. These are the cables that we'd plug into HD-based T extenders or plug into network switches, right? We're all familiar with this. It's a traditional standard twisted pair cable maxed out at 100 meg. Okay, that's not a lot of bandwidth, especially when we talk about the signals we're moving today. We'll look at some of those signals. We'll actually quantify this here in a minute, but know this for sake of conversation right now. Standard twisted pair cable, 100 megabits per second max bandwidth, 100 meter max distance. So that's 330 feet. That's a number that most people are familiar with. Now, obviously, most of the cables that are being sold today, we're using those for higher definition video or faster network speeds. And now we're getting into the enhanced twisted pair cables. These are shielded. Look at the cable on the screen, right? Most people are probably familiar with what it takes to take those shields and strip them back. You're getting into pretty bulky cables here, expensive connectors. Well, one of the nice things about enhanced twisted pair cable, we see a variable bandwidth that will go from 1 gig, so about 10 times more bandwidth than that standard twisted pair cable, all the way up to 10 gig, but it's very distance reliant. And more importantly, it's very environmental reliant. So if we have sources of interference, because remember, twisted pair cables, they're not immune to interference. You can get RF and electromagnetic, lightning, static surges, all of these things will affect that twisted pair cable. So those bandwidths and those distances are very variable based on the environment. But we do see these twisted pair cables, these enhanced shielded twisted pair cables, they can handle some bandwidth here. But now we're talking about fiber. And fiber is an optical core, as most people know. These optical cores easily handle 10 gig. In fact, when you start to take the electronics out of the conversation and just look at the cable, we're talking about optical pipes that can handle up to 100 petagigs worth of data. You know, it's 10,000 times more bandwidth than what we see even out of a Cat 7. So you got a lot of bandwidth capacity in fiber. More importantly, or just as importantly, you don't have distance limitations. So when we start to say, okay, look, I need to move 4K, I need to move 8K, and we're getting into some of these real world installations, you know, commercial, where we're pushing 100 feet, 200 feet, 5,000 feet, whatever the distance may be, fiber's going to do that. And you don't have to worry about shielding, bulky cables, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I know that there's a lot of conversation right now in the industry around Cat 8. Okay, Cat 8's been released. There are specifics around that. There are specifications around it. So let's talk about what Cat 8 brings to the table. So first of all, it's a bulky cable. It has to be, okay? Individually shielded pairs, okay? It's also very, very expensive to terminate. So if we look at the average price per foot of Cat 8, we're talking about 65 cents per foot. If we talk about the connectors, you're talking about $15 on average per connector. It's a big cable, almost half an inch in diameter, very small bend radius. So 6.8 inch minimum bend radius. This is a real bulky cable here. And you've only got about a 25-pound pull rating. So if we compare that to fiber, and by the way, we'll do this. I mean, anyone who's taken other trainings, you know my favorite slide in any training deck is putting cables side by side and looking at the specifications. But this is not the easiest cable to work with, but it does support 2 gig up to 30 millimeters or 30 meters, or about 100 feet. And it will even hit 40 gig over short distances. Now, there's not a spec on short distances, okay, because it's incredibly dependent on the environment. Really, what we talk about here for 40 gig are short patch cords under 10 feet. But Cat 8, it's a real thing, up to 40 gig, big cable, bulky cable, it does handle bandwidth. So now let's turn the conversation right now to the environment. What are people doing in real world installations? And let's just start by talking about the average residential project, okay? The reality is most fiber that's being integrated, it's being pulled dark. Why? Because people want a future-proof installation. They're seeing this curve on your screen right now. They're seeing this migration of the average household that used to have 23 connected devices in 2018. Well, what do we see today, 2020? Over 50 connected devices. What used to be just a PC, laptop, maybe a tablet or a phone, well, everything's hitting the network. And here's where it really starts to get interesting. And here's where it gets very important with your customers, okay? A real conversation you can have with your integration partners. You can start to quantify how much bandwidth goes into all of these connected devices. So let's look at this. There's a lot that hits the network, okay? Most of the devices like thermostats, IP phones, wearables like your watch, your sprinkler system, your shade controllers, all of these devices are fairly low bandwidth intensity, okay? We're talking about a 1/4 meg per second in terms of what the toll is on the overall network. Now, there's a lot of these devices though, right? When you start to quantify all the different things pinging the network, you get a lot of them. IP phones start to ratchet that up, okay? Now we're moving audio. We're streaming music. Now we're moving audio. On average, that's about 1 meg, okay? Now we start to talk about moderate bandwidth devices, video doorbells, security cameras. How many security cameras are we starting to see in residences, in commercial environments? Well, now we're moving video. And actually, in terms of the video intensity of a lot of these moderate devices, it's not terrible, about 2 megabit per second in terms of bandwidth per device. It's important to realize that these are concurrent connections. So if you have 8 cameras, right now we're talking 16 to 20 meg, and that's the minimum bandwidth. And obviously these numbers vary a little bit based on makes and models, but this is what we see in the industry as an average. Here's where the conversation completely changes. Now we move video, okay? Whether you're doing online video gaming, we're seeing about 6 meg per concurrent connection. So if 2 people are in the house, each one's on a PC or maybe a video game system, you're starting to eat a lot of bandwidth. Now we start to talk about streaming video in terms of distribution of content. Not just like what we're doing today, we're watching a webinar, but think of how your customers are watching TV. That satellite box, that cable box, those are going away. Even the telecom providers, the satellite providers like DirecTV, Charter Spectrum, all of these providers that would historically deliver our content via a set-top box, they're moving in favor of streaming media players. Okay, Apple TVs, Roku's, smart TVs. This is where you have a very large impact on that network. We're seeing speeds exceeding 5, 25, 60 meg per concurrent connection, okay? And that's assuming it's at the minimum. Obviously, you see spikes. And when you start to see spikes in traffic, now you start to have problems with that network. But I know, right, when we start to talk about short cable runs and enhanced twisted pair, right, you saw that 1 gig specification. You're saying, well, it does take a lot of connections to really exceed the capacity of these twisted pair cables. And you're correct. If it's a short distance, twisted pair, it's still handling these signals just fine. Now, it's a lot of bandwidth, but it still handles these signals. But now we start to get into additional issues, right? Let's talk about video. So far, we've been talking about packetized streaming, okay? And yeah, we can't use standard twisted pair anymore. It won't handle streaming video. You got to have an enhanced cable, and you got to keep that cable run short. But now let's say we want to take that set-top box and we want to go out to our projector or our flat panel. That's different. That's not packetized distribution. That's now video distribution, unpacketized, uncompressed video distribution. And here's where we're seeing a whole lot of bandwidth, okay? 4K signals that we're installing today, working with today, 18 gig. That is more than what those 10 gig cables can even handle. So when we talk about a Cat 6A, a Cat 7 cable, even a Cat 7 cable, they can't handle native 4K. Can't do it. Got to compress those signals way, 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 way down, okay? A lot of color space compression. Now we talk about 8K. And I know most people, they're out there, they're talking about video, they're working with integrators. Integrators are installing 8K displays, projectors. That's 48 gig. Guess what? You can't compress 48 gig down below 10 gig to even get onto that Cat 7 cable without completely destroying the integrity of the signal and introducing a whole lot of latency. So once the video goes from being packetized, basically streamed, and now it's getting, unpackaged in that media player, and now we want to distribute it throughout the home, you're dealing with too much bandwidth for a traditional twisted pair cable. Think about it. Even that Cat 8, that really expensive Cat 8 cable, that really expensive connector that's, really limited in distance, still can't handle native 8K. And this is where the conversation for fiber starts to really take a turn. And this is where you sitting down with your customers and explaining, look, your projects, you're pulling cable today. You got to start thinking about all these streaming devices. You got to start thinking about where will the displays be located? Where will the racks be located? We need to talk about optical cable because we can make sure you can deliver all of this content, all of these big signals. Let's compare fiber, okay? My favorite slide, all the trainings that we do, I think this is the most telling because I will tell you, most of the folks you work with, they're going to be scared of fiber. They're not going to know how to terminate. They're going to think it's very, very expensive. They're going to think it's very, very fragile. It's very hard to work with. This slide tells a story. And if you look at one of the most popular cables that's being sold, single mode duplex fiber, okay? What are we dealing with? Cable that easily supports, beyond 10 gig, 100 petagigs worth of data, right? 4.4 millimeter cable diameter, okay? 60% or 30 to 60% thinner than what we see in the twisted pair cable, over 100-pound pull rating, 7.5 millimeter bend radius. Put it anywhere. Put it in the plenum space. Put it in the wall. Put it outdoors. By the way, this is waterproof. But it's 20 cents a foot. I can't overestimate that or oversay that. 20 cents a foot is really what's selling fiber now. You can pre-wire. You can pull it dark. You can get it in the wall. You can future-proof these installations. You can make sure you can handle 4K, 8K. You can connect a bunch of streaming TV. It's 20 cents a foot. And the most popular cable we're seeing now are these cables that are really designed for universal application. This is the ECOFiber line. Everybody should be familiar with these now. Duplex fiber, universal jacket, really small, really pliable, 20 cents per foot. A lot of materials on this so you can, provide this to different folks, walk them through this cable. Go online, right on the homepage, you see a training video on how you can terminate these cables. It's not difficult. So why are we seeing this flip to fiber? What do we talk about when we're saying, look, you're familiar with twisted pair. You got to start migrating this installation over to the optical realm. Well, video resolutions, they have to have the bandwidth. It's not a matter of if anymore. They have to have the bandwidth, 48 gig. That's what it takes to move 8K once it's been unpackaged, okay? Network connected devices, there's a bunch of them now. And by the way, most have some sort of video integration, doorbell, security cameras, the computers that we're working with. We're doing FaceTime. A lot of even the the little portable devices that we used to use for streaming music. Now they have video capability. So all this video, that's a lot of bandwidth. Fiber will future-proof your installation, but more importantly, it's easier to work with, smaller, stronger, terminates less expensively. Tools are about $500, and the overall cable cost is actually less than twisted pair. At 20 cents per foot, you can future-proof these installations, really make these real world. You got to continue to talk about that, make sure people understand this, get folks on the phone with us. Obviously this is a sales webinar. The whole point here is to make sure you're understanding some of the value proposition around these different cables. And certainly you're going to get asked a lot of questions. I'm comfortable with twisted pair. Why do I need to make the investment to learn about fiber? And as we start to talk about bandwidth, as we start to talk about the modern installation and the lack of the set-top box, lack of the cable box, all the streaming media, we got to think about this. So I want to thank everybody for attending today. Again, another one of our short little 15-minute webinars. I appreciate you taking the time out of the day. You see my contact information here. Everybody on the call probably knows me pretty well. Feel free to reach out. You will get a link to this recording. Feel free to share this to other folks within your organization or share it with different partners that we all work with in the field. I hope all is well. Take care. Be safe.